Hello everybody, and welcome back to the Ōkami walkthrough. It's time for the final part of the extras of the video treasure chest. Now, the video treasure chest, I believe, can only be opened up if you have spent over 31 hours in Ōkami. So, there's a very specific way of unlocking it. But it's pretty damn easy to do, so there's no real worry. So, I mean, it's a very easy thing to unlock. Basically what it does is it houses loads of, essentially, trailers and promos for Ōkami. So obviously, the visual quality is not going to be the most wonderful thing in the world, because these are all pretty compressed, and actually when I was watching them, they're all in the most bizarre aspect ratios. I don't know I don't know what is going on with them all, but they're all different sizes and it's ridiculous. So I had to do quite a lot of editing to try and get it to look all consistent. But what's really cool is that in this you get to see beta footage of Ōkami. So you saw, the fact of Himiko was seen outside of her palace. And there are so many things that changed throughout the course of the development. For example, I don't think we ever see that particular location unless that's the Ankoku temple from a different angle. And you're also going to see loads of differences in the hood. So you're going to see differences in how the solar energy is displayed, how the ink pots are displayed. There's all sorts of things that changed, and it's really nice to see. But I will say that the two biggest things that you're going to want to see are the final two videos in this kind of list, which are the concept videos for Ōkami. Now, I can't actually remember how you unlock those concept videos, because they are only available if you achieve a very specific thing, but I can't remember for the life of me what it was. So, essentially what you need to do to get those final two videos is you need to beat the game with complete S ranks, like I did, and then you will have those final two videos, which are the concept ones. So that's what you needed to do. But it'll take us a while to get there. Now obviously here you can see the fact of Karuda was in Seion City, which is odd. You can see this whole kind of dragging thing, which obviously never appears. A first-person shooter mode, which never went anywhere. Waka's randomly standing here. The game went through quite a lot of changes. Obviously there's the visual thing, which you'll see at the end, but also gameplay-wise, because, obviously this is a very different gameplay style than what ultimately ended up in the final game. And also I think we saw that kind of snake dragony enemy there, which is quite impressive. And kind of surprising that it never went anywhere. The fact that they had a model for another enemy and then never used it. And also just there, I think we saw the slightly older Kokari. So, there is a lot of beta stuff available here. But I suppose, seeing as I won't have a huge amount of time to deal with it when it actually appears on screen, I'm going to talk to you about the beta for Ōkami. And I have mentioned it before, but this is kind of like specific information from Hideki Kamiya himself, stated in an interview with 1UP about the early prototype of the game. And this is the realistic style that was present. So, in this interview, and I'm reading these quotes from this interview from unseen64.net, so go there if you want to find it. But essentially what Kamiya says is that when I first started talking about it with producer Tsuchi Inaba, the only starting point we had for Ōkami was a game that depicted a lot of nature, he said. I couldn't say I don't know if this would be fun or not, because then nobody on the dev team would be enthusiastic about it. So instead I was like, this is going to be great, I know it will. So eventually the discussion shifted to a wolf running around, and we made this minute-long video depicting a wolf running through a field and trees sprouting up behind him, and I told the team, see, isn't that neat? Eventually Ōkami made it into the prototyping stage, but Kamiya's problems didn't end there. Our first test run was incredibly boring to play, he recalls. I was grinding my teeth at night, I was so worried. At one point we were so far off track that it had turned into a simulation game. You had hexes and trees sprouted on them. It was total garbage. A couple of devs said to me afterwards, something was definitely wrong with you around that time, Kamiya. And I suppose it's difficult sometimes to make sure that it's difficult to land on things immediately. It's that whole thing with finding the inspiration. Because I think Ōkami went over budget and took far longer than it was originally planned to take. So, and essentially it did lead to the closure of Clover Studios. Or at least that's what most people suspect anyway. Because Capcom couldn't really afford to deal with all of these kind of failed projects. And, I mean, pretty much the nail in the coffin was God Hand, because it did even worse than Ōkami. But because, thankfully, Clover was still a very creative company, they kind of felt stifled under the weight of Capcom's corporate management, so they left. And that's why Platinum Games was founded, really. So, Ōkami occupies a very important place in the history of Capcom, and in the history of pretty much everyone who then went on to work at Platinum. Because it is basically their last critically successful title with Capcom. And it was also sort of like their last hurrah, almost, because God Hand more or less went out with a jazz hand whimper, I think is how I'm probably going to describe it. Like, obviously it was completely ridiculous and stylish and so on and so forth, but it bombed both critically and commercially, so yeah. But we are about about a third of the way through this this video now. But obviously I should put out that here you can see the state of the paper filter. So obviously in the Wii version the paper filter just isn't there. You get a slight glimpse of it, but other than that, nothing. Whereas here you can see it's quite heavy, so everything looks like it's done on parchment. But I have to say, like, the hood is just hideous. I don't know what they were thinking with this design. Like, everything's just so big and blocky, it's bonkers. And if you saw the little box that was in the bottom left-hand side of the screen, I'm honestly not sure what that was meant to be. Don't know if it was meant to be, say, like a clock to show you kind of the time of day. I think it looks more like it's a compass to try and show you where the camera's facing, to try and help you with all of that. But it's not really very clear. Still, at this point, kind of, it's looking much more recognisable in terms of what you're seeing, because you're seeing like all of the Suta Ruin stuff and the Acta Forest stuff. So all of that is kind of recognisable, but like the character art is different to what it ended up being. I mean, obviously, that character art is like, oh dear. But they certainly really improved things from the final release. I mean, there we get like the Divine Intervention, which only a few videos earlier just wasn't quite as impactful, shall we say, because I think it was just more done within the game itself. Also, I have to say, and this is something that I only really noticed in watching the video treasure chest, is that video game trailers from around this period, or at least it might just be the Ōkami ones, but Japanese trailers tend to be rather odd in their construction. I think it may just be Ōkami, but like, they seem to build up to nothing, but sometimes you just get random things that make it keep going. So some of these trailers just feel far too long and they're not really showing anything, and it's kind of annoying. Like, watching some of these, I don't think I would be that interested in Ōkami. Anyway, I guess in a way that explains, well, could partially explain why the game didn't sell particularly well. Because if this was the sort of thing that they were using to advertise it, it's not hugely interesting. I mean, it's got the kind of the visual charm, you get the idea of kind of all this magical stuff happening, and the gods, and you get a decent kind of view of how the Celestial Brush works. But the trailers are oddly kind of static. I mean, even when you've got like these more action-y cutscenes being shown, there's no real build-up to a climax, which is how trailers tend to have the most strength in being memorable. I mean, if you look back to like the most memorable trailers that you have ever seen, they've got a very specific way of working, even if they are showing off gameplay or not. I mean, for example, you've got the rather infamous trailer for, oh god, what was it? I think it was Dead Island? Yes, Dead Island. The one that had that kind of spectacular announcement trailer, which was all CGI and everyone was very impressed with it, and then the game was awful. But like, that was a very well made trailer. And I'd also say that pretty much everything, all of the trailers for Bayonetta were stunning. Bayonetta 2's less so, if only because I think Nintendo's trailer team is not quite perfect with things. Like, they don't quite know how to end a trailer per se. Some are obviously better than others. I mean, like, the Smash trailers have pretty much been consistently excellent. But, like, for other games, not so much. They're of the same sort of... They show off things quite well, but they're not hugely engaging. I mean, it's why things like Super Mario 3D World were kind of... Well, didn't do particularly well in terms of immediate impressions. Because people just took one look at it and thought, not sure. Whereas, like, I mean, the first two announcement trailers for Bayonetta 2 just hit it out of the park. Because they were fast, sharp, and just, they did what they needed to do and didn't outstay their welcome. Obviously, it's a different situation when it comes to things like this, because this is more of a explanatory promo. So there are a few examples of this throughout promotional material. I mean, it's generally like whenever they show off weapons in games or different character outfits or what have you. I mean, also the Square Enix, because it's Enix, not Enix, which is it doesn't work in my head, but oh well. In their E3 presentation, they did this sort of thing, although it was kind of like with voice rather than text, is how they kind of got this sort of information across. Obviously, it's times like this where I wish I could read Japanese, because then I would be able to tell you what this is all saying. But I mean, I think, seeing as you've already seen the game, you kind of get the gist of where it's going. It's kind of all talking about the Celestial Brush and getting praise and doing side quests for people and mini games and all that kind of jazz. Now, I have to say, this isn't something that I did a whole lot of in the game, but I did pick up a few little creatures, which you probably noticed, which was a lot of fun. Now, I would say that this particular promo is pretty comprehensive in showing off what you can do, because it shows off quite a ridiculous number of brush techniques, and also kind of what Army is capable of. So it's helpful, it's just they probably could have done a better job of editing it. I mean, I suppose if Capcom was dealing with trailers, they're not hugely brilliant on it themselves, so... I mean, also, really, Ōkami is quite a hard game to sell, if you think about it. I mean, the only way of describing it is saying it's a Zelda-like role-playing game in which you play as a wolf goddess, restoring beauty to nature and trying to save the world from demons. I mean, that is quite a cool thing to experience, but if you start going into saying, like, it's got loads of stuff to do with Japanese mythology and history and culture, and it's got loads of kind of video gamey quirks, it's not really a mass title. It's not a game that would achieve major kind of public approval. It's not a game that would typically sit in the AAA blockbuster space. But I mean, it technically does sit there because it is a kind of big blockbuster title from Capcom. At least that's what it was released as. Obviously, it's ended up being more of a niche critical darling. But I think that works out quite well in Ōkami's favour, because its journey has been one of phenomenal word of mouth. It didn't do hugely well when it was released on PS2, because it was released at the end of the PS2's lifespan, so people were moving on. The Wii version didn't do hugely well either, because I think there was the fallout of their choices and the fact that it was a buggier version of the game, and also I don't think they marketed it hugely well at the time. But the fact that you had those two versions of the game out there meant that enough people had played it and loved it that the general internet's appreciation of the game was made known. So obviously when the HD version got announced, there was just so much love pouring out for Ōkami. And even if it didn't sell well to begin with, that gradual love for the game kind of pushed through and made Ōkami HD at least somewhat of a success, from what I remember correctly. So, I mean, while it's never done kind of ridiculous numbers, it has improved greatly over time. I mean, it is still, like, ridiculously beloved. It won so many awards, and it's got a really wonderful legacy. Obviously, it was unappreciated at the time, but I think people these days hear Ōkami and recognise it as one of those games that is kind of elevated onto a pedestal and is one of those titles that they think, maybe I should play that at some point, because pretty much most of what they will have heard about it is love and kind of positivity surrounding it. And I mean, when you've got kind of that much love surrounding a game, you do tend to step up and take notice. I mean, not all the time. I mean, for example, there's no way in hell I'm looking at that Undertale game that everyone is absolutely enamoured with at the end of 2015 here. But the main reason for that is that I don't really do 2D turn-based RPGs. I've never really been into that style of game. I need a little bit more visual stimulation, I suppose. Which, I mean, does mean that I'm probably missing out on an excellent game, but sometimes you do just have to look at things and just think, is that something that would interest me? Yes, no, maybe, God knows. But obviously everyone has their own tastes in games, and sometimes you just let certain titles fall by the wayside. That said, you should always think of giving games a chance if there's even the slightest hint in your mind that you look at something and think, oh, there's a possibility I might really enjoy that, even if it doesn't look like something you would normally go for, then I would say try it out. Because, I mean, there are definitely titles that have come out where I've looked at it and thought, I'm rather interested in that. That could be something I quite enjoy, and I've got it and I've loved it. I mean, just recently I managed to get my hands on a copy of Zack and Wiki, The Quest for Barbarossa's Treasure, because I'd always heard kind of pretty good things about it, and it's just always been one of those games that has just been sitting in my... I'd like to get it, I've not really got much of a drive to get it, and then I saw it for £2.50 in a shop and I thought, oh yes, I'll get my hands on that, thank you very much. And while it's certainly a flawed game, I really enjoyed my time with it. It's pretty much... it's one of those underappreciated gems on the Wii, I think. So it's situations like that where I'd say, just try things out if you think there's a chance. Because, I mean, you may be surprised into finding that a game becomes one of your favourite games of all time. I mean, that may not always be the case because, you know, there are certain games which you can just feel the quality emanating off them, and others you can feel that there's a slight budgetiness emanating from them, and so they can't quite be elevated to that sort of level of perfection, but they can still be really beloved. You can still adore them. But I think that's probably enough of that sort of blather, because we are really close to the end of the Ōkami walkthrough now. Just another 2 minutes or so. We have those 2 concept trailers left to go. The one which is going to show us the original look of Ōkami, the real life kind of look, which is stunning. And then we're also going to see the original watercolour art style concept for Ōkami, and that is also wonderful. So, with these final 2 videos, I just want to say thank you to everybody who has followed me through this walkthrough. I know it has taken a very long time to complete, but hopefully it has been very in-depth, very kind of complete, and also very informative and enjoyable, hopefully. And I hope that you will join me in the new year when I begin the next stretch of my walkthrough journey in whatever I decide to do next. I mean, I'm not quite sure where I'm heading with things just at present, but it will be fine, it will be fun, and who knows, we could see some old favourites, like in terms of old series that I've started but not finished yet, return. There may be kind of brand new things that you've never even seen before. You'll just have to wait and see. But this video is it for the Ōkami walkthrough. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you'll join me next time.